There's a moment when we've all felt when you realize someone in your life is no longer safe. It's not loud, there's no dramatic fallout. It's quieter than that. It's the sinking feeling after a conversation when you replay their words and think, did they really mean that? Or the tightness in your chest when you share something personal and their reaction leaves you feeling smaller, not seen. We don't always talk about it, but wise women know this moment well. And more importantly, they know what to do next, not with anger, not with gossip, but with clarity, with silence, with distance, because the strongest boundaries are often the quietest ones. Research tells us that the quality of our relationships directly impacts our physical and mental health. Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad's work on social connections shows that poor relationships increase the risk of early death as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Let that sink in, 15 cigarettes. Yet, we still hold on, don't we? We tell ourselves, maybe it's not that bad, maybe I'm being too sensitive. But wise women, they listen to that discomfort and they cut off, silently, these 5 types of people. The first, the underminer. You know this person. Maybe it's a friend, maybe a family member, maybe even someone you work with. On the surface, they seem supportive. They smile, they nod, they say the right things, mostly. But something about their words leaves you feeling a little less. Like you've been subtly deflated, but you can't quite put your finger on why. You get a promotion, and they say, wow, that's amazing. I don't know how you manage that kind of pressure. I could never handle it. Or you mention you're starting therapy, and they tilt their head slightly and say, good for you. I mean, I'm lucky I've never needed that, but I've heard it can help people. It's the pause, the hesitation, that little edge, wrapped up in concern or humility. And it chips away at you, piece by piece. Psychologists call it passive undermining, but we know it as that feeling in your gut. You walk away from those conversations thinking, was that support or was that something else? And more often than not, you'll convince yourself you're overreacting, but you're not. Research backs up what your intuition already knows. Dr. Shelley Taylor's work on stress and relationships shows that subtle forms of negativity in close connections can be more damaging over time than outright hostility. The brain perceives those micro hits of criticism wrapped in kindness as threats. And each time it happens, cortisol, the stress hormone, spikes, even if you're smiling through it. Here's what's wild. Studies on feedback and performance show that people who receive constant, low-grade undermining perform worse over time. Not because they're less capable, but because they start questioning their own abilities. That's the hidden cost. You don't just feel bad, you start shrinking. The tricky part is these people often believe they're helping. That's what makes it confusing. They're not throwing stones. They're handing you flowers with thorns. And for women, especially those who are stepping into leadership, starting something new, or breaking generational patterns, this dynamic is even more common. Dr. Joan Williams, a researcher on workplace bias, found that women are more likely to receive soft criticism, the kind that's padded with compliments but leaves you second-guessing. It's not an accident. It's how discomfort with female competence often sneaks out in polite society. But wise women, women who've learned the hard way, don't get stuck trying to decode every comment. They trust the feeling. You don't need to analyze every interaction like it's a crime scene. You just need to notice, do you feel lighter after talking to this person? Or smaller? Does their support lift you, or is it laced with doubt? When you start paying attention, the patterns become clear. And the response doesn't need to be dramatic. You don't need a confrontation. You don't owe them an explanation. Wise women step back quietly. They stop sharing their wins with that friend. They don't bring their new ideas to that colleague. They choose safer spaces for their joy and their growth. Because your dreams are fragile when they're new. Your confidence is still taking root. You can't afford to let subtle doubt be the first thing that touches it. Cutting off doesn't mean you don't care about the other person. It means you care about protecting what you're building. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for them is to walk away without noise, without anger, but with certainty. Because a wise woman knows silence is not weakness. It's strength wrapped in self-respect. The second, the chronic taker. You don't see it right away. It usually starts small, innocent even. They need a favor. Of course, you're happy to help. That's who you are. You're the person people can rely on, the one who shows up. But then it happens again and again. And before you know it, you're the one they call when life gets hard, when plans fall through, when no one else picks up. They need advice. They need your time. They need you to listen again. And you give it because you care and because somewhere along the way it started to feel like your job until one day you need them. Nothing big, just support. Maybe you're having a hard week. Maybe you just need someone to check in on you. You reach out and the silence is louder than you expected. Or worse, they show up but half-heartedly. They listen, but you can feel their attention drifting. You get off the phone and you don't feel better. You feel lonelier. That's when it hits you. This relationship isn't mutual. It's a transaction. You give, they take. Research on emotional labor, a term coined by sociologist Dr. Arlie Hochschild, shows that women disproportionately carry the burden of tending to the emotional needs of others. We become the default listeners, the peacemakers, the ones who remember birthdays and smooth over conflicts. And when this role becomes expected rather than appreciated, it turns into what psychologists call compassion fatigue. You start feeling drained, not just physically, but emotionally. It's that quiet exhaustion that creeps into your chest, the kind that makes you feel like you've been pouring from an empty cup for months. Studies on burnout confirm this. It's not just about workload. It's about the imbalance between what we give and what we receive. Relationships can be a source of energy or a slow, steady leak. Chronic takers, they are the leak. But here's the hardest part. Chronic takers often don't see themselves that way. They don't think they're using you. In their mind, they're just leaning on someone who's strong, someone who always knows what to say. And that's the danger. You start to believe it too. You tell yourself, they need me. I can handle it. I'm strong. Until you're not. Until you're the one falling apart quietly, showing up for others while neglecting yourself. Wise women see this pattern before it breaks them. They recognize the weight of carrying a relationship alone. They stop measuring love by how much they can endure, and the shift is quiet but powerful. They stop over-explaining. They don't text back immediately. They let the call go to voicemail, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because here's the truth. Real connection is reciprocal. It's not about keeping score, but it is about balance. You deserve to receive as much as you give. My research on belonging teaches us that true belonging doesn't require us to betray ourselves to be loved. It requires us to stand in our worth and believe that our needs matter too. So wise women step back. They choose relationships where their generosity is met with gratitude, not expectation. They let go with resentment, but with the quiet understanding that their energy is precious. Because a wise woman knows you can't build a whole life while constantly holding up someone else's. The third, the trust breaker. It's not always a big betrayal. Sometimes it's just a small crack. You share something personal, something that took courage to say out loud, and a week later you hear it from someone else. Maybe the details are off, maybe it's softened, but you know exactly where it started. Or it's more subtle. You open up about a struggle and later you sense it being used against you. Not directly, but in a passing comment, a joke wrapped in laughter that lands a little too hard. You tell yourself it's nothing. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You say, they didn't mean it like that. I'm being sensitive. But your body knows better. That ache in your chest, the heat rising in your face, it's not overreacting. It's your nervous system recognizing a breach. Dr. John Gottman, a leading researcher on relationships, found that trust is built in the smallest moments. He calls it sliding door moments, when someone has the chance to turn toward you or away from you. Over time, those small choices add up to safety or disconnection. Trust is not built in grand gestures. It's built when someone remembers your hard day and texts to check in. When they guard your story like it's their own. When they show up.
Every time.
Not perfectly, but consistently. But when trust is broken, it's rarely one dramatic fall. It's erosion. You start holding back just a little. You share the surface stuff but keep the real pain tucked away. You laugh along, but there's a tightness in your throat. You begin protecting yourself in their presence. And that's when you know the relationship has shifted from connection to performance. Dr. Paul Zach's research on oxytocin, the hormone that bonds us, shows that it surges when we feel emotionally safe. When trust is present, our bodies relax, our guard lowers, we can be vulnerable. But when trust is compromised, cortisol takes over. We tense up, we scan for danger, even if we're smiling on the outside. Wise women feel this shift. They don't need evidence or confrontation. They trust the tightening in their chest, the instinct to pull back. Because here's the truth, explaining why someone should be trustworthy never works. Trust is not demanded, it's demonstrated. So, wise women stop chasing it. They stop trying to convince someone to handle their heart carefully. They let distance do the talking. They don't announce it, they just start choosing other people who hold their stories with care. This isn't about perfection. Everyone gets it wrong sometimes, but wise women know the difference between a mistake and a pattern. When someone repeatedly makes you feel unsafe with your own truth, that's not clumsiness, that's a choice. And choosing to cut them off quietly is not cruelty, it's self-protection. Because a wise woman knows her voice, her story, they are sacred, and not everyone has earned the right to hear them. The fourth, the drama magnet. You recognize them almost instantly, though it takes time to admit what you're seeing. Every conversation is a crisis. Every day is a new conflict. There's always someone who's wronged them, someone who didn't meet their expectations, someone they're furious with or heartbroken over. This week, at first, you lean in. You want to help. That's what good friends do, right? You listen, you offer advice, you try to bring perspective. You think maybe they just need support right now. Life gets hard. But then you start noticing the pattern. The names change, the details shift, but the story is always the same. It's not just a bad week, it's every week. And somehow they're always the victim, always at the center, stirring the pot, even when things could have settled. You tell yourself you're being compassionate, but if you're honest, you feel exhausted. You get off the phone and your heart's racing like it's your problem. You check your messages at night, already bracing for the next wave. That's not connection. That's emotional hijacking. Dr. Susan David, a psychologist who studies emotional agility, talks about how unchecked emotional reactivity, being constantly caught in the highs and lows, creates stress not only for the person experiencing it, but for everyone around them. Our brains are wired for emotional contagion. Neuroscientists have found that we mirror the emotions of those we interact with, often without realizing it. If someone is in constant turmoil, your nervous system absorbs it like secondhand smoke. And it's not just mental, it's physical. Chronic exposure to high-stress relationships triggers cortisol surges that wear down your immune system, mess with your sleep, and over time can even increase the risk of heart disease. But here's the part that's hardest to admit. Sometimes we stay because a part of us likes feeling needed. Being the stable one, the voice of reason, that can feel like purpose. It can make you feel important. Until it doesn't. Until you realize their chaos is starting to drown out your peace. Wise women catch this before it breaks them. They stop mistaking someone else's crisis for their calling. They learn that stepping back isn't abandonment. It's clarity. It's understanding that you can care about someone without carrying their emotional load. You can offer empathy without climbing into their storm. The shift is subtle. You stop asking for every update. You don't rush to solve. You let their text sit for a while before responding. And eventually, they notice. Some people will pull back naturally. Others will escalate. They'll accuse you of changing, of not being there the way you used to be. That's when you'll know your role in their life was never about mutual support. It was about keeping their emotional world spinning. But wise women don't rush to defend themselves. They know that protecting their peace is not selfish. It's essential. Because a wise woman knows you can love someone and still choose yourself. The fifth, the subtle competitor. It doesn't always look like competition at first. Sometimes it looks like friendship. maybe even admiration. They cheer you on, loudly, publicly. But there's something beneath the surface. You feel it in the quick comparison when you share good news. You hear it in the, wow, must be nice when you get an opportunity. You see it in the tension when life starts going well for you. It's subtle, but it's there. When you succeed, their smile tightens just a little. When you struggle, they lean in a little too comfortably. And it leaves you questioning, am I imagining this? Because they're not cruel. They don't tear you down outright. They celebrate you. But something about their celebration leaves you feeling watched. Social comparison theory, first developed by psychologist Leon Festinger, explains why this is so common. We're wired to evaluate ourselves in relation to others. It's how we gauge progress, how we measure success. But when comparison takes root in a relationship, it shifts the dynamic. Your win starts to feel like their loss. Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion shows that people who lack a foundation of self-worth often struggle to celebrate others. Your success feels like proof of their inadequacy, and instead of inspiring them, it triggers insecurity. But here's what makes this type of person so hard to spot. They often don't know they're doing it. Their insecurity is masked as interest. Their envy dressed up as concern. So you keep sharing because you want to believe the best. You let them into your dreams, your plans, your moments of pride. But over time, you notice, you're holding back. You catch yourself shrinking, making your achievements sound smaller. You downplay the good things to avoid the look, that flicker of resentment they try to hide. That's when you realize this relationship isn't safe for your growth. Research on goal pursuit and social support confirms this. People with encouraging, non-competitive friends are more likely to achieve their goals and sustain success. But those surrounded by subtle competition often experience higher stress and lower confidence, not because they're less capable, but because they spend so much energy managing the emotional undercurrent. Wise women feel this shift early. They recognize that true friendship is spacious. It leaves room for everyone to thrive. There's no scarcity in love. Your light doesn't dim theirs. So they make a quiet choice. They stop giving front row seats to people who can't clap without comparison. They start guarding their wins like they guard their healing, not with secrecy, but with discernment. The distance isn't punishment, it's protection. Because a wise woman knows her growth is non-negotiable, and the people allowed close will either water it or withhold the sun. Cutting people off silently with grace is never easy. It goes against everything we've been taught about loyalty, forgiveness, and being a good person. But wise women understand that protecting their peace is not cruelty, it's clarity. It's knowing the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. It's realizing that your time, your energy, your heart, they are sacred. And not everyone has earned access to them. Letting go doesn't mean you wish them harm. It means you wish yourself well. It's choosing to build a life filled with mutual respect, real trust, and people who want to see you win, not because it benefits them, but because they genuinely love you. So when you feel that quiet knowing in your gut, the signal that someone is draining more than they're giving, listen to it, trust it. Your boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They are doors that guide the right people in. You deserve relationships that leave you stronger, not smaller. You deserve people who celebrate you, not just tolerate you. And most importantly, you deserve to be at peace in your own life. Good luck, and thank you for having the courage to choose yourself.